When you look at spermidine, it stimulates cytoprotective autophagy to extend lifespan. A, what does that mean? And what does that do for people? Hey everyone, Derrick Hines here. Welcome to the podcast where I'll share with you the patterns, insights, research, and technologies that we use in my own pain and performance practice to help people improve their health, speed their healing, and increase their longevity. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy it. Don Moxley, welcome to the Pain and Performance Podcast, man.
I am excited to be here. I hope it's a lot of performance and very little pain.
Yeah, that's always the joke that our patients talk about. They're like, we come in here with pain and then y'all start talking about making us do all kind of things. So, yeah, I'm glad you caught that. Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. It's always fun whenever we have these things that I think people need to know about, but not enough people do. And we can really dissect, like, how does this affect every area of somebody's life? So sure. I'm excited. Today we're going to talk about spermidine, which is one of these kind of compounds that too few people know about when you start digging into the data and the research on it. So if y'all are listening to this, we're gonna dissect this. You want to know about what this compound does and can do for you, and kind of what we were talking about before we got going is like the extent of research on spermidine is incredible. There was an amazing article, and we can kind of dissect that by Medeo, where he kind of goes through all of the benefits of it. But one of the statements that I thought was really powerful is that, when you look at spermidine, it stimulates cytoprotective autophagy to extend lifespan. A, what does that mean? And what does that do for people?
Well, let's break the terms down. So cytoprotective is cellular protection. That's what we're looking at. And one of the challenges is, Derrick, is that when a cell is doing cell things, okay, it's trying to make proteins and divide. That's what it's trying to do. And when it gets a signal to make a protein, and that signal comes from when you consume food, you consume carbohydrates and proteins primarily create the signals. When you consume a carbohydrate, it creates a signal of insulin. When you consume a protein, it creates a signal of what's called IGF, insulin-like growth factors. And that's what tells the cell, hey, let's do cell things. So the cell pulls that in, and then there's a process that kicks in. There's a protein in the cell that's called mTOR, and mTOR says, oh, there's stuff on board. Let's go ahead and make proteins. And it goes into the nucleus and grabs some DNA and pulls that out. And it goes into the ribosome. And the ribosome converts that DNA into amino acid chains or protein strings. And that's how you make proteins. But the problem is that process is not always correct. Okay? So not all the proteins are made correctly. And if a protein is not made correctly, or if it's not folded correctly by another organelle called the endoplasmic reticulum, if it's not done, it just sits there in the cell. And we use the analogy of a cabin in the woods. So if you've got a cabin out in the woods and it's winter time, so as long as you don't have too much snow, you can go out and gather firewood and bring it into your cabin and burn the firewood and heat the cabin. But if you have a bad storm and you can't get out of the cabin, all of a sudden you've got to do something to stay alive, to keep the heat going. So you start by burning the parts of your cabin that are not usable anymore. If you got a piece of broken furniture, you break it up and you throw it in the fire. If you've got stuff left over, you throw it in the fire. Well, this is the same with this is the process of autophagy. This is where you're going in and cleaning up the parts of the cell that are no longer functional, and puts them back into a usable form. Because remember, if you've got a protein in the cell that's not usable and you digest it, it digests down to a series of amino acids that you can go back and reconstitute into a new protein again. So the cytoprotection, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about being able to create, to clean up things, and the benefits that come from this. You cannot separate autophagy from longevity, health span or lifespan. The two go hand in hand. And Derek, this is a relatively, remember, we gave a Nobel Prize in 2016 to the researcher that described autophagy.
Yeah,
Um,
this is right. I mean, this is just unfolding, in the scheme of history. This is a baby. This is brand new.
it is bleeding edge. There's no two ways about it, and I work with doctors every day, and I was talking to my niece graduated from physician's assistant school about 6 months ago. So, she's newly minted, just went through the curriculum. I said, have you heard the word autophagy? She looked at me like I was speaking French. Um, so this is the challenge, is that right now the science is ahead of the curriculum. And when you start looking at healing and all the things that go on, so much of the medical system is about resolving symptomatic problems, not necessarily preventing. Well, there is the beauty of what's happening right now is there is a significant part of the population that has said, I don't want to wait for a symptom. I don't want to wait for this. I want to get a hold of this. Now, we call these people biohackers, which is a word that we can, that you got to be careful with. But it's just someone who's taken ownership of their own health span, lifespan, human performance. And again, so when you start looking at things that let you live long, prevent the onset of disease that is associated with aging, inflammatory things, cardiovascular disease, cancers, these kinds of things. Well, this is the challenge. And this is where autophagy comes into play, because autophagy is connected to all those.
Yeah, we talk, and certainly our listeners have been familiar with, fasting. We've had some amazing podcasts on the benefits of fasting mimicking, and how that gets into autophagy, where you can actually clean up and clear these damaging and malfunctioning cells, which you described perfectly, because like the accumulation of those is often where we start to get into an inflammatory process. It's starting to get into these malfunctioning cells that can turn into, cancer, disease states, accumulation of kind of toxins, and being able to tap the button of let's clean all this stuff up is vital if we're going to go through life and feel good and not accumulate damage inside of our body. So until I started studying this, like my major input into autophagy was always doing fasting or fasting mimicking. And that was something that we were having conversations with patients about. It's interesting whenever we're talking about spermidine's effectiveness and its place in the mechanism of getting how fasting gets us into autophagy. Can you kind of dissect that for us a little bit?
Yeah, and this is very new science. Literally, we have a paper that we expect to be published next month. It's been accepted. They're in the middle of editing, and just to stay ahead of it, and who knows? I don't know if the editors of Science listen to your podcast, and they'll be worried about the embargo. But if you take worms, fruit flies, or mice, and spermidine it comes from a family of what's called polyamines, which comes from arginine. So the amino acid arginine goes through a series of processes, breaks down into what's called putrescine, which is a 2-nitrogen polyamine. With spermidine synthase, this is converted to spermidine, which is a 3-nitrogen polyamine. Well, if you block spermidine synthase in these model organisms, what we find, if you block it so that we minimize the amount of spermidine in the system, and then you fast those organisms, they don't get autophagy, or the autophagy is dramatically reduced. So when we started talking about spermidine in the market, we referred to it as a calorie restriction mimetic, that it mimics fasting. Well, we're ready to change that language now to the point that it is a key element in the autophagy pathway. That even if you fast, if you don't have spermidine on board, your fasting does not yield autophagy at the same level. So we've identified essentially a autophagy vitamin. It's an essential nutrient. And vitamin comes from the term vital amine. It's a polyamine. It's a vital amine. So this is the interesting part. So, we've always looked at spermidine, or at least for the last 3 years, we've looked at spermidine as this calorie restriction mimetic. Well, like resveratrol that Dr. Sinclair talks about in his book, or like metformin, like Nir Barzilai's working with all his work in that area, those two molecules certainly trigger autophagy. But in the absence of spermidine, lower in the system, that autophagy is not going to be as effective.
And I want to get this into some of our programs and see what happens. We've had a number of patients who have gone through a reset program that includes a fasting mimicking program. We get them into some other advanced therapies to encourage that. And there's certain people who have a really easy time getting into that autophagy phase, but also like ketosis by that second or third day. And then we have other patients who struggle with it more. They'll go through like a detoxification phase where they're kind of getting some symptoms from it. And we've looked at different ways to help their body get into that better. I'm 100% interested in those patients who've had trouble getting into some of the effects of the fasting mimicking programs. If we take them and supplement with spermidine, what is the outcome? What's the changes over that next program?
Sure.
How much different do we see their metrics? We measure a bunch of things during that. I can only imagine what we would see with that supplementation stack. And that's where this kind of changed for me, is that to me, because this is such a critical player in the autophagy pathway, it's like we still should probably press the button as a human. Let's still press the button, which is getting into some fasting states a few times a year. But let's help that button send the signal to go and make all those changes. What's your thoughts about that?
Yeah, the button's got to be connected to something. Okay, we can push buttons all day, but if we don't have it connected to something, and literally one of those crucial connections looks like it's going to be spermidine.
Yeah.
So and again, remember, autophagy is present in the cell at all times. The question is it upregulated or downregulated? I think a lot of times the language around fasting and autophagy, we look at it at a binary level. It's on or off, and it's not. It's a fader. It's not a switch.
Right.
And so listen, the evidence is very clear from epidemiological data that there are different spermidine levels in different diets. When you look at blue zones, these are spermidine-rich diets, and it'd be interested to go back and look at your patients that click in well versus those that don't, to look at their food sources. Does one have a garden, and does one buy their food at the local grocery store? Because I grew up on a big farm in eastern Ohio. We were relatively, it was a relatively, poverty situation. It was a big farm, but we had no cash. We didn't, going to the store was a challenge a lot of times. So we had 2 1-acre gardens that basically we lived on, and they got fertilized with our barn residue. Now, listen, cleaning the barn was no fun, and fertilizing the garden was no fun, and we didn't know how well we had it back then. But the tomatoes that came out of that garden were it was like eating cotton candy. Okay, they were amazing. Now, I've never eaten a tomato as good as we had there that in a store. You just can't find them. Yeah. So the taste. That experience of that homegrown high quality, those are nutrients. Those things you're tasting are nutrients. Those nutrients are vitamins and minerals and polyamines and all the good things in life. And I think, in our challenges, I know, my wife and I live in an RV and we travel all over the country. So there's no shot at a garden in our lifestyle right now. When you look at this, we've got to pay attention to, okay, what's going on with the nutrients in our diet? Are we able to drive this? And this is, our, Derek, I do a talk where my first slide in my talk is I show a killer whale in the wild and a killer whale in captivity. And the killer whale in captivity, their dorsal fins bend over. And there's not enough environmental force living in an aquarium for that orca to express its DNA of a straight killer whale. And then I talk about lions in old zoos versus new zoos. The lions in old zoos lived an average of 3.5 years. They were neurotic. They had digestive problems, just like our friends. I've added a new slide, by the way. My third slide now is of research mice. That if you take a research mouse and you put it in a research mouse cage and you give it a bottle of water and a bottle of opiate water, they will drink the opiate water until it kills them. But if you take that same mouse and you put it in an enriched environment, they won't touch the opiate water. So is our issue, do we have drug problems today or do we have environment problems today? And then my fourth slide is this big gorgeous glass building with these two human hands up against the glass. And I asked the question, what side of the glass, what side of the aquarium are you on? Are you on the inside or are you on the outside? So you have to look at your environment. You have to pay attention to that. And again, I went from a kid who grew up on a big farm and a big farmhouse, and we did this. Now I live in an RV, and I've seen, we've been in 33 states in the last 24 months and 10 national parks in the last year. It's been unbelievable. But what do you give up when you change that environment? You got to respond to that and pay attention to it.
What are some of the spermidine-rich foods that we could work into our lives?
That's the challenge. Okay, the one that we know for sure is what's called natto. It's a fermented wheat soy product. Now, if you can choke that down, good for you. It's like eating snot.
Is it not good? It's not good.
It's awful. Now, if you grew up in an Asian culture and you grew up with this, they like it. Okay, not me. And this is the next challenge. So when we extract our products, so we're a natural food extract. We're not a synthetic product. So we go get wheat germ in Central Europe. And so we have to go find wheat germ that's spermidine rich. We buy that wheat germ. We bring it into our process. We then eliminate 75% of what we bring in just because it's not rich enough in spermidine. Then we run an extraction process that uses only water to refine it down to what we call our Cellular complex. So what I'm saying is that even in spermidine-rich environments, there's a huge variation in spermidine. And then when you start looking at wheat germ in Europe and wheat germ in the United States, it's a whole nother game. Okay, we have glyphosate-rich wheat germ, and we cannot find wheat germ in this country that has enough spermidine that we can extract it. So
how much would you, I think the other question that I have is whenever I was pulling research, it seemed like we were looking at roughly 10 milligrams per kilogram. Does that sound right?
I can't tell you right off the top of my head.
So if we're looking at trying to get, let's just say I think that was from the Singh study in 2021, that 10 milligrams per kilogram decreased oxidative stress, improved antioxidant, improved electron transport, down-regulated IL-6, which I would love for you to
You're talking about what should we supplement at? I'm sorry, I was still thinking wheat germ content.
So, that's my question is, like, if that's where the research is at, that this is about what we need, how much would you have to eat? Is it even possible?
It's a real, so first of all, 10 mgs per kg is a lot. 10 micrograms per kg might be closer. That what we're seeing is that, the European Union gave us permission to market a product that was a 1 milligram per day product.
Okay.
It became evident to us very early on that we needed a stronger product. The kind of the hero product that we see people using is a 2 milligram per day product. we have up to 6 milligrams, and that's coming from the natural food extract. If you go to Google and you Google spermidine, you're going to see 20 different options, and you're going to see some super high spermidine contents for a relatively low price. That's all synthetic. There's been zero human research done on synthetic, so it's a buyer beware situation. It's been banned in Europe. We don't expect the FDA to do that, but certainly the European Union has already done that. So I think, as far as dosing, it's closer to this 2 to 6 milligram level, maybe, and depending on therapeutics, we have several doctors that they're using it for treatment of fatty liver disease. There was a really good paper on non-alcoholic fatty liver that may not be an issue with just consuming too much fructose. That rather it may be the downregulation of an enzyme in the liver that's necessary for digesting that is spermidine dependent. But increasing spermidine levels improve non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So it's in that metabolism pathway, and it's highly variable. So I wish I could give you concrete dosing. I wish I could. We just don't have it. We're too early in this, but we're kind of looking at a thing that prophylactically you're looking at 2 milligrams a day. Therapeutically, maybe boost to 6, or somewhere in between there. And
so that would be something like if you were using it as almost like, let me get ahead of like a problem or a disease state, let's go 6, and then for prolonged anti-aging, let's drop back down to kind of a moderate, 1 or 2 grams a day.
Yeah, the doctors that I'm talking to that I really trust that's what they're doing. They're starting them on a higher dose, they're bringing them back down, and then they go surge it maybe once a month. They'll do 10 days once a month, 10 days every 2 months of the higher dose, and then come down to that prophylactic 2 milligram.
Yeah, and it's brilliant to think of it like that. I was reading an article in Aging and Disease from 2021 that they kind of go through how much this should be a necessity in neurodegenerative diseases and cardiovascular disease.
Sure.
And kind of what's going on with those, how it can affect those. Let's kind of pry those apart a little bit. So if we're looking at like a cardiovascular disease state, obviously keeping inflammation down in the vessels is important because that's what's going to start the kind of atherosclerosis process. If we have inflammation in there, and that damage starts to create the pathway towards an atherosclerosis. How does spermidine kind of shift that and protect us from some of those changes?
Well, you're first of all, it's probably working through this nitric oxide pathway on the endothelium within the cells. Number one. Now, I think it's important, from a listener standpoint. We have on dementia. We have a study in out of Bonn, Germany, on dementia that showed supplementation of 6 milligrams a day stopped the development of dementia in adults.
That's incredible.
But it's not reversed.
Right.
Okay, so important part. That's a really important point. When you look at the things that kill you after 40, heart disease, cancer, inflammatory immune system, all the the big 4 there, which are all inflammatory related. I'm not sure that if you're on the verge of a heart attack today, I'm not entirely sure supplementing spermidine is going to move you away from that fast. Okay, but if you get this in your diet early and you make it part of what you're doing, it will prevent you from getting to that point. And I think that's really important. We're looking at this. I think you have to look at this not necessarily. Listen, this we started off talking about medicine and biohackers and things like that. This is taking ownership for your health and wellness and performance and getting ahead of it early. So and again, so primarily working through the nitric oxide pathway. You also see some increased myocyte stemminess. So those cells in the heart, it increases. So we see improvement in stem cells at two different levels. We see back to the paper Spermidine in Health and Disease, we see an upregulation of epithelial stem cells, the cells that go on to make your hair, skin, and nails. And one of the things that really the main phenotypic response that we get from our patients is 3 to 5 weeks after they start taking this, my fingernails started growing like crazy. There's some really interesting data on skin and wound healing so autophagy is an important part of wound healing, that when that skin is coming back together and you have that wound, upgraded autophagy is what causes that, and spermidine is part of that. And again, if you're improving epithelial stem cell production, that only makes sense that's exactly where it's going to land.
Yeah.
So back to the cardiac, back to the myocardium, you're going to see some myocyte stemminess. You're going to see an improvement in cardiac mitochondria autophagy or mitophagy in there. So you're going to go in and clean out those old mitochondria that are no longer functional, so the good ones can go ahead and reproduce and build. And it looks like there may be a stimulus there to increase mitochondria production. So now a lot of variables are going to go into that, but having that underlying nutrient sitting there is certainly an advantage.
This is quite rare. You mentioned natto, and do you know if that's related to the annatto plant?
I don't know.
Are you familiar with that? No?
I've only heard it described as soy, a fermented soy product.
Interesting. We had Dr. Barry Tan on here who discovered the annatto plant is 100% tocotrienol vitamin E, which reduces inflammation in the vascular system. Like, very, very interesting episode on like how that whole pathway works. But you say that, and I was like, man, are those running together on some front? Yeah. If it is, then I'm like, I'll choke some of that down.
I've only had the opportunity. We were out in LA and we were in kind of a Chinatown situation there, and I saw it and I said, okay, I've got to try this. And it was not special.
So let's shift gears a little bit and go. So that makes a ton of sense, I think, from a cardiovascular standpoint. And then if you are getting any improvement in inflammation, you stack those things together. And this is, I think we were talking about it before, is like, what's the aggregation of marginal gains? It's like each little improvement stacks on each other, and we're getting some improvement in inflammation and some improvement in cell function and clearing out, and improvement in mitochondria, and all those help each other. And now we're getting this massive change that really can affect our health and longevity. When we're looking at the brain and how this affects the brain, there was two things I wanted us to kind of talk about and explain to the listeners. Most of what I found in there was that when we did this, we downregulated the IL-6 gene in an aging brain. And that means it was basically, when we supplement with spermidine, it was neuroprotective against oxidative stress in the brain. Mm-hmm. Let's explain a little bit of what that means for people. And back to what you were saying, when should we add this into our life if we're worried about something like dementia or Alzheimer's or neurodegenerative diseases?
Okay, so two questions there. Number one, we know spermidine crosses the blood-brain barrier, and it goes up and functions in the brain. Number two, just for what it's worth, we've got some people doing some work looking at it as it relates to head injury, concussion, things like that.
Love it.
I've got some special operators, naval special operators that have, we've got some testimony on this saying, hey, it just makes us smoother, because those guys are concussed all the time. Listen, if they're not running their heads into a wall, they don't think they're a lot awake. But but so when we start looking at lowering inflammation, those key elements, and again, if you rattle that melon, you're going to have inflammation. It's going to be there, and you want to do whatever you can to reduce that. So so we know it crosses, we know it goes in, we know it lowers inflammation. We also know now nerve cells. You know that nerve cells are the slowest growing cells in the body. Skin cells are the fastest, nerve cells are the slowest. And so those nerve cells, it's important that we keep them healthy. And what we do know, whether it's dementia, we have another paper that showed humans who were supplementing spermidine were seeing an increase in hippocampal thickness. So the part of the brain that's responsible for memory, we're seeing more hippocampus there. That was pretty interesting. So another nice little side benefit from that paper.
Up my dose now.
Yeah, there you go. We'll do all we can, right? But and again, just cleaning up that process, improving. And if you look at Alzheimer's, the Alzheimer's is a result of the aggregation of that tau protein. Well, where's that protein coming from? That's a malformed protein that looks like autophagy will do a more effective job of cleaning out. We actually have an autophagy study going on right now that I'm just dying to see that paper. When I don't expect that paper this year, but they're looking at this, and I think it will be really interesting because it is a clinical human study that's going on. But going back to that just cleaning up the system, that it's your cabin in the woods. Everything that you can do to keep that thing clean, the better off you're going to function. If you walk in and you're stumbling over piles of old newspapers and broken furniture and things like that, you don't function in there as well. Same thing in the cells. And from an immune standpoint, Derek, I think listen, this is going to directly affect immunity, the ability of a virus to enter a cell and create havoc. We know that our latest virus that everybody was obsessed with, and was a pretty bad situation for some people. When you look at COVID, the people who struggled most with COVID had comorbidities. Okay, these are diabetics, overweight, things like that. These are people who have low autophagy. I think about this. I remember with the onset of that, I remember them interviewing this Detroit bus driver. And this guy's talking about driving a bus at the onset of the pandemic, and he's talking about people getting on his bus and coughing all over him, and he didn't know what he should do. And 3 weeks later, this guy's dead. And this is just a guy that wakes up every morning and goes and drives a bus because he wants to feed his family, and he probably stops at Dunkin' Donuts on the way and grabs a donut and a coffee, and he probably grabs a piece of Little Caesars pizza. It's Detroit, so it's either Little Caesars or Domino's. Grabs a piece of pizza for lunch, and he's just existing. He's in his aquarium, right? And unfortunately, his aquarium did not sustain a lifestyle that didn't lead to comorbidities, didn't lead to high autophagy. So the virus. Well, we have a paper out of Berlin that showed human immune cells supplemented with spermidine stopped COVID transmission 85, 90, 92% of the time. As you upregulate autophagy, that virus is relatively weak. It's relatively easy to head off. But you've got to do it with practices that trigger autophagy, and clean that cell, because we know that the COVID virus interferes with the onset of autophagy. So that first steps of autophagy, the endothelial reticulum peels off a piece of tissue that what encapsulates the part of the cell that it's going to digest. Well, it overstimulates that, and then it interferes with where the lysosome attaches to this to digest it. It interferes with that. You get this buildup in the cell. We know that's how the virus works. Well, as you boost autophagy from other mechanisms, you're able to finish out that autophagy process and clean it out. I know when the pandemic hit, I was in the middle of a massive fast, okay, and fasting process. And I had spoken at a workshop down in Florida. Everyone was coughing. This is very early in the pandemic. Everyone was coughing. I fly back up to Ohio. Everyone I knew got sick at this conference. Some got really sick. I had no symptoms. And again, I'm in a massive fast, really pushing it hard at that time. About 3 or 4 weeks after that, I got this thing they call COVID toes. It's a microthrombosis on the top of the toes. And my wife looks at me. She goes, "What's going on with it? What'd you get there?" And I didn't know what it was. It looked like someone had just stepped and kind of ground the tops of my toes in. And I look it up, and then I went back and looked at my wearable data. So do a lot of wearable technology, and I looked at my Aura Ring data, and 10 days after that conference, you see my HRV tank, you see my respiration go up, you see my sleep disturb, classic COVID diagnosis. But because I was in the middle of this massive fast, and I had some physiological data, I write a bike trainer that tells me exactly what the wattage is when I'm training. And there was a period of time when it was really low. I mean, I was using, where a normal ride, I'd be 180, 190 watts. I was down in the 120 watt range just to get to my heart rate zones. I'm thinking, I'm tired. There's something going on. Oh, no, there was a little cellular monkey business going on there. But I was still asymptomatic. If the symptoms are, expressed as what you'd see at your doc's office. So that's cellular immunity, supporting cellular immunity. That's one of the huge benefits of autophagy.
Yeah, we worked with quite a few people on like long COVID, not to kind of stay on that. I know a lot of us are trying to get past block some of that stuff out.
It's the real deal. So,
but and so we had a medical liaison who saw a lot of patients in Chicago, and we worked together on quite a few of our local cases. And one of the things that he brought up that just hit a light bulb for me was that his thought was some of these more controversial treatments, ivermectin and some of those, their actual mechanism was autophagy. He was like, we're talking about all of this stuff. We're looking in the wrong place. I think the reason they're helping is that they are getting people into autophagy. I was like, that if we should have said that from the beginning, that makes complete sense to me.
Well, but put it in context. That was 2019. They gave the Nobel Prize in 2016. That was 3 years after that.
Yeah.
Okay. People we're not thinking in those terms. And it takes a pandemic sometimes to make you take a step back and say, okay, what's going on? And let's really drill into this. And there's been a lot of great science done on this, so we understand it better. But yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of things that drive autophagy. So yeah, I agree with you that putting it in context was critical.
What's some other, we've kind of probably hit a couple of different areas of health, talking about brain health, anti-aging, cardiovascular health. Hopefully y'all have gotten kind of the inflammatory, thought around some of this. What's some of the other practical applications of spermidine that if somebody's listening to this, it's like, okay, that gets me over the edge. I need to bring this into my life.
Derrick, I go back to why do you take vitamins? Okay. So there are some vitamins that we take, man, we feel it. Okay. I mean, if you have a low energy state, and you're struggling with energy, there's two ways you can affect it. You can give them a B12 shot, which is going to increase red blood cell production, which is going to carry more oxygen around to the cells. Or you can go with a NAD precursor, nicotinic acid, nicotide riboside, anywhere in there that's going to increase electron transport in the mitochondria, which is going to increase energy production. So the question is, what vitamin do we need? Okay, what is the micronutrient that is necessary to get the response we're looking for? This is where spermidine is starting to pay attention. And the thing I go back to, this is not a young person's supplement. Okay, if you're a high school athlete, I don't have any data yet that causes me to say, okay, you should go ahead and supplement with this. Now, if you're a young athlete with a head injury, different story. Okay, but I don't think it's a young person's vitamin because we know it declines with age. We know that happens. But if you are a I think of life in 3/3. First third, we spend learning in school. Second third, we spend earning or in service to others. That's when we're raising families and working. Our third is your third. That's my third, you know. And my wife and I, our daughter moved out of our home a little over 2 years ago. And we went into our third. We're done raising our kids. She's off, got her job, doing well. And we're in our third. And I want this third to be my best third. You know, I want to love this. And that's, you know, I said earlier, you know, I've been in 32 states in the last 24 months and 10 national parks. And I mean, it's just part of the process. I want this to go for another 30 years. Yeah. And I also tell the story, you know, I've had a chance to coach amazing athletes, Olympic medalists and national championships and pros in all the major leagues. But my favorite coaching job ever was my daughter's 8th grade field hockey team. I loved that. And I want to coach my grandkids. And about 6 or 7 years ago, I was living down in Florida, and my nephew qualified for the Florida State High School Wrestling Championship. And he's a big boy. He wound up playing Division I football. He was a Division I center, so he's big. And, you know, I walk around about 6 feet, 270 pounds. And he was 6 feet, 280, 290. And again, a pretty thick 18-year-old, you know. I had good enough wrestling skills that I could take him the first day. You know, I could really push him. In fact, kind of got the best of him. The second day, I was an effing mess. Okay. I walk in and everything just starts popping and I'm like, I'm out. You know, I had no resiliency. But I want to be that 80 or 90-year-old whack job wrestling coach. I want to be that guy that can still demonstrate. And it takes intention. Okay, so what is my intention? My intention is get there. You know, before we started recording, you said, how's my day going? I said, I had a great workout just a little bit ago. Why am I doing the workout? Because when I don't work out, my knees hurt so bad I can hardly walk. I've had 8 knee surgeries, you know, so I have to stay on top of these things. And I kind of let myself, you know, when we started this RV thing, I kind of let my fitness go. I did not invest in it quite enough. I've changed that. I'm back on the boat. I'm back on the wagon, and it's working. It's paying off. So, going to go answer your question. When you start to invest in your longevity financially, when you start a 401k, when you start to do this kind of stuff, you need to start thinking about investing in your longevity nutritionally as well and spiritually. And so I think if you're 35, 40, and you're starting to think about investing, start to think about using a product like Spermidine. You know, the other thing that you're going to learn when you're in that middle third, you're probably going to have to deal with the passing of your parents. Okay. And this was really hard for me. My mother passed away 4 years ago. She did hospice in our home. And I watched my mother go from the strongest woman I ever met in my life. I mean, she was a beast when we were kids, to where I watched her pass away. I don't want to go now. She did pretty well. She did not pass in a hospital, hooked to tubes, things like that. You know, she had a good ending. My brother, on the other hand, that I lost 3 years ago, he had developed an autoimmune thing that they couldn't name, and COVID took him out. And he spent the last month of his life in a ICU, you know, on a respirator. Homie's not playing that game. You know, I want my last days on this earth to be involving maybe hiking the Grand Canyon and slipping on the edge and enjoying the ride down and just, you know, taking the whole thing in.
Have you ever seen the movie Secondhand Lions?
I don't think I have.
My favorite part is it's a wonderful movie. If y'all haven't seen it, it's old. I don't know when that was filmed. Maybe in the 90s. I would be my guess. But this guy's uncles raise him and of course share all these brilliant lessons. And they call him and they're like, "Well, your uncle's passed away," and he shows up. And there's this big crash site at the thing. Sorry, spoiler for anyone.
That's right. Yeah.
The lessons in it are well worth the watch, and you kind of can detect this from watching it anyway. But they're like, the best we can decide is that they built a plane and they were trying to fly it upside down through the barn, and one uncle was 99 and the other uncle was 98 or something like that. And I was like, that's it. That's it. That's what we want, is to live long and die fast.
Well, and Legends of the Fall. I love the quote in Legends of the Fall. He died a good death. He was wrestling with a bear. That's the part of that. So I don't know that I necessarily want to wrestle with a bear, but could be interesting. So going back to answer your question, I think you have to treat it like a vitamin. You have to treat it like a vitamin, that when you consume that vitamin, it's going to improve not only middle age, but later in your life, and get it jacked up. And the data gets clearer and clearer on this, that it's a more essential nutrient. We expect to have vitamin status at some time. But I don't expect to be a baby vitamin. I don't expect that. But I do think it's something that you start to work into your life 35, 40 years old. If you're 25, 30, I've had several calls with customers. I'm 25, 30, they've tried the product. And I said, listen, I love the fact that you tried it. We appreciate it. But you should take the rest of your bottle and give it to your parents. And give it to your grandparents. I think that's the mindset that you have with a product like this.
Yeah, and some of this we look at, and my listeners have heard this. I think probably once we turn 40, until I see other data, I will recommend that once a quarter you do some version of a prolonged fast or fasting mimic, depending on your age and your muscle mass. I feel like that's where me professionally see this starting to really make an appearance. And look, if we think that we need to be doing that, then this should be an addition to that to really heighten the benefits, the cellular health and everything that we've talked about. One of the questions that I have, because when we look at autophagy and we look at prolonged fasting and the benefits and cell protection we can get from that, is cancer. Do you know of anything that they've looked at spermidine in cancer cases? Is there safety concerns or anything like that?
We're not. So there's a couple papers out there. There's one with stroke. There's one with blood pressure, and there's one with cancer, that they see increase spermidine content in the serum. Now this is the important part. When you start consuming spermidine orally, you will not see an increase in spermidine in the serum. This is really important. So the polyamine that follows spermidine is called spermine. Spermine has 4 nitrogens. Spermidine has 3. And the body, in its infinite wisdom, recognizes, hey, if I need to move something around the body, let's go ahead and repackage it. It gets repackaged as spermine, goes around to the cell and gets broken back down through spermidine synthase back down to spermidine. So when you see a buildup of spermidine in the serum, it's more of an indication that you have a disease state and your body is trying to fight it. Okay, and we've got a lot of data out there showing that increased oral consumption of spermidine does not lead to increased spermidine in. Look at me. I used both phases of the word in the same sentence. Spermidine, spermidine. It doesn't. We're not concerned about that. We're concerned about, if you do have increased spermidine levels in your blood, you need to figure out what's causing that.
Gotcha.
And it's not oral consumption. It's like white blood cells. When you have a raise in white blood cells, you've got a process going on. Well, spermidine in the serum can be the same way. So we're not concerned. And we have a fella out of the Weil Medical out of Cornell, Weil in New York City. Galuzzi, Lorenzo Galuzzi, who is a research oncologist, and he spends a lot of time looking at this, and he has advised us that it's for oral supplementation is not the issue. The same way spermidine-rich wheat germ consumption is not going to cause cancer.
Yeah.
There's something else going on there that you need to be concerned about.
Well, and I think even deeper than that, could this be used to improve the body's protection if somebody's going through like a chemotherapy? Not something that we know.
Not something that I know, and I'm going to let you make that call.
Well, it's interesting because we do have at least some mechanism of action where if people are doing some version of prolonged fasting while they're doing that, that healthy cells can go into a bit of a dormant state, and cancer cells have a really tough time doing that. So if we're doing that with chemotherapy, we can kind of get some cell protection in our healthy cells, and the cancer cells take the brunt of the chemotherapy effects.
I see.
Or the radiation effects. So I'm like, that's really tough for cancer patients to say, hey, look, I'm already having trouble eating. I want you to go through a period where you intentionally drop. So it's like, I'm just, thinking out loud as we're talking about this, if there's a way for us to tap into that without them having to, kind of go through a true fasting state. But
yeah, listen, the challenge, well, first of all, you got to remember, and cancer is not one thing. It's a bucket of cellular misbehaving. And there's a lot of things that can trigger different ones. And we do know the role of ketosis. There's a lot of cancer cells that are very sugar happy. They live on that. They're living through glycolysis, and that you go into ketosis and you shut them down. Well, is that ketosis, is the beta hydroxybutyrate also triggering an autophagy response? I'm going back and restate it for one more time. 2016, we are such on the bleeding edge of this. Again, we have enough data. I think not just enough. I think we have a substantial amount of data saying, hey, this is an important micronutrient. And we have enough data that says not only is this an important micronutrient, but it's not in most of your diets. You look at blue zones, those 5 areas around the world where people routinely live to 90 or 100 years old. They're spermidine-rich diets. We've measured that. That means everyone, if you don't live in a blue zone, you've got something that you need to pay attention to.
Yeah, I'm with you. I love that. I think we're on the very early stages of starting to see how far-reaching these effects are from autophagy in general, but other ways for us to kind of capitalize on these beneficial effects of everything. You mentioned some of the wearables. What things, if we're looking at longevity and we're kind of on this front, what do you recommend on that? Where can people start measuring some of these things and really see some changes?
I personally believe, when you look at, have you read Peter Attia's book, Outlive?
I have read one chapter of it because my book is almost finished and I don't want any more information. So I have the book. I might have it on this shelf, but
I get it.
I'm going to pause it for a moment. I do know he's got some awesome stuff in there.
But Peter raises a concept in his book that I really like. It's called Medicine 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. 1.0 was Hippocrates. Eat well, move around, you'll live better. And then Medicine 2.0 starts after Anton van Leeuwenhoek invents the microscope. We discover that there are things that we can't see that can make us ill, viruses, bacteria, things like that. And we start to look at antibiotics, and that's Medicine 2.0. And we're certainly in the middle of Medicine 2.0 right now. But we're now starting to recognize that Don Moxley has a physiology and an environment that's different than Derrick Hines's. And the question is how do we, other than going and getting a blood test 1 to 4 times a year, which we've learned is just the bare basics. What is the key KPI that we use to measure health? I think of 3 KPIs. Number one, I think it's hard to ignore the value of heart rate variability, and stress response and resiliency. So when it comes to a wearable, I pay close attention to HRV. What do we know about relationships? Well, we know that the minute before you die, your HRV will be 0. You'll be full stress mode. Okay. And I know my Olympians have HRVs in above 100 milliseconds. And this is what's called RMSSD, but that's so there's a range. I think you always want to be working away from 0. Okay. You always want to keep now, and I say that, and I get a lot of inquiries from people saying, hey, I've got an Oura ring and my HRV is 17 to 30. Okay. Quick point. It's good that you're aware of it, but going from 17 to 0 is hard. Okay, there's probably as big a difference between 17 and 0 as there is between 70 and 17. Okay, so that last little bit. So don't let the data scare you and create more stress than what you can deal. But let it be a guide. So I think you always want to look at doing things that move you away from 0. Is one of the things. Number 2, we're everyone's kind of obsessed with VO2 right now as a marker for longevity. As someone who's been measuring VO2 for 40 years now, there's no way in hell I would take someone and say, oh, you need to go get on a treadmill and run till you George Jetson off the back so we can figure out what your VO2 is. No, your resting heart rate is an excellent indicator of cardiovascular health. So if you have a wearable device and you go to bed and your heart rate is dropping into the high 40s, low 50s at sleep, you know what? You've got pretty good cardiovascular fitness. If you're going to bed and your nighttime resting heart rate is 70, you've got some room. You've got some room to work there. So it's little things like that. So nighttime resting heart rate as an indicator of cardiovascular fitness, I think, is a really good tool to look at. And then the third element I look at is I call it watts per heartbeat. That if I go out and the house we used to have, I had a rails to trails bike path right in front of the house. And it was the same 20-mile route. It was under the trees the whole way, so wind wasn't a big deal. So I could measure my fitness based on just my time to ride that 20-mile route. But when I wear a heart rate monitor, and if I'm able to do that at a lower heart rate, same amount of work, lower heart rate, that's it. I'm more fit. Okay, so if you just have a simple task where you go walk around the block or run around the block or ride your bike a certain area, and you're able to do it in a time with a lower heart rate, you're doing more work per beat of the heart. That means your cardiovascular fitness. It's going to be a secondary indicator to your nighttime resting heart rate. I like watts per heartbeat. I like nighttime resting heart rate, and I like HRV. I think those 3 are KPIs that really make a difference. And again, I talked about earlier, we started this new lifestyle. My training practices changed dramatically. Changing my environment. I used to have a 16 by 24 room on the back of my house. I had the nicest gym on the back of my house you ever saw. So training was easy. I had a big 6-person sauna in my office. It was wonderful. And if you look, I have a sauna in my RV. Part of making the decision to move into the RV, I had to figure out how to get a sauna into it because it's such a big deal in my personal wellness. But looking at the environment, what do you have to change? It's not about going to the gym more. That is not the solution. It's about changing the environment. If you don't walk enough, get a dog. Make so that you have to go walk more. Things like that. Change the environment because it's our environment that is changing us, and that's what's so important. So you got to take a conscious control over that. Yes, I have tomatoes in my refrigerator. Are they as nutrient dense as the tomatoes I had growing up on the farm? Not even close. Okay. So that's kind of when I go back to. So as far as wearable device, I want something that measures HRV accurately. Most of the products on the market do not measure HRV accurately. It's like getting on a scale that says, hey, you weigh between 1,000 and 15 pounds. You're somewhere in that range. That's what most of the devices on the market do. You've got to have the right device, and it's usually got a research grade sensor in it. That's your first clue.
Gotcha. Yeah, we've used a lot of Oura Ring data, at least for recovery, and
Yep.
as people are making improvements, a lot of time sleep will improve. HRV on that will start to trend up. It's interesting.
Yep.
I started taking spermidine probably last summer. I'm coming up on a year. And that would be interesting for me to go back and pull the mass data and see some trends from it. I'm not sure how long Oura keeps all of your
it's there.
all of your metrics.
You
It's in
can
there
go
somewhere
get it.
though.
It's there. Yeah. Another device. So Oura is a good device. I'll tell you what I'm liking right now. There's a group out of Amsterdam that's called Now Watch, NOWATCH.com. It's a much more, it's a wrist worn device, very fashionable. It's, I worked for Polar for a long time, the heart rate monitor company, and we used to sit on airplanes, and this is before cell phones and things like that. And you'd sit on airplanes, and I'd watch people walk on the airplane. You knew they're in the tribe if they had that dorky Polar watch on their wrist. And if you're wearing like a Cardio Mood or a Whoop or something like that, I find it fun to sit and watch people on TV who are wearing Aura rings. So I have a good friend who still works at Aura that helped design it actually, and I'm like, hey, have you noticed so and so wearing your silver ring? Now Watch I like what these guys are doing, and their role and their ability to address mental health is really impressive. They're very early. And then the third product I like a lot is called Cardio Mood. It's a British tool. They use a Philips sensor. I really like what they do too. They have a good product.
I love it. Don, this is awesome, man. Tons of really valuable information. Where can listeners find more about Spermidine, more about what y'all are doing over there, more about some of y'all's other products that are coming out?
If you want to learn more about Spermidine, you go to spermidinelife.us, SPERMIDINELIFE.us. And you'll see everything that we've got there. There's lots of information up there on that site. If you wanted to get a hold of me, the best way to get a hold of me is go through LinkedIn. If you'll search for me on LinkedIn, I'll pop up. I have most of my podcasts that I've done up in my profile there if you want to learn more. We've got other products that we've talked about, our Mode and Method HRV Plus product. We're launching a new product right now called NAD Life that we're pretty excited about. It's a pretty cool product that they've developed in Austria. So literally we're launching it this week. And we're having this conversation the third week of May. So that's what's going on. So LinkedIn and spermidinelife.us.
So we ask all of our guests, and I feel like we've dropped a number of hints about this, but if somebody's listening to this and they can do one thing today to improve their health, what's the one thing?
If you can do one thing to improve your health, well, awareness. Recognize that we evolved with a set of genes that were really catalyzed, depending on the archaeologists you talk to, between 100,000 and 1 million years ago. Okay, so the genes we walk around with were essentially settled. Neanderthals and Homo sapiens had pretty much finished what they're doing. Then we've gone through a series of major environmental changes. 10,000, 12,000 years ago, we had the onset of agriculture, and slavery came at that point too. So we have governments arise and we have control taking place of people. That was a big change, okay? Big change in environment. We have the Industrial Revolution, where we go from where we're traveling on horseback and living in agricultural settings to where we start to move into urban settings. And agriculture, is able to supply this. We've gone through a technical revolution, which all of a sudden, you and I are working right now, talking to screens in two completely different places, but we're connected by the internet. And there's certainly an issue there's a good to it, but there's also a bad. So recognizing the impact of your environment. Derek, I think of I call it 4 rocks in my jar of longevity and human performance. Number 1, you have to move. The more you move, the better you move. You hack that with exercise and other things. Number 2, you need nutrient-dense food. If you can't get nutrient-dense food, then you have to supplement, and you got to figure out what your environment doesn't have. Number 3, sleep. We have to prioritize sleep. We have minimized sleep for decades. It was a huge mistake. Those who sleep better are smarter and healthier. And then number 4 is light. Getting light on the skin at the right time is important. And these 4 rocks all go into the jar of purpose. What is your purpose? What wakes you? Why do you wake up every day? Because if you don't have purpose, environment will win. Okay, if you don't have a reason to wake up, and purpose for a college athlete is usually an athletic goal. We're working towards a national championship or something. But when you move out of athletics and things like that, if you're working, it's to make more money or to do affect so many people or things like that. But when you move past that, what is your purpose? it took me a while to figure this out. I had this really cool job at Ohio State. I was a sports scientist. We were measuring 3.5 million data points a year. We were doing really cool stuff, but I had to leave. I don't play well with others that don't want to be progressive. And it was just, and so I got an invitation to go work in the cannabis industry in Florida. And because I had this indication that cannabis and HRV is interesting, there's something there. So I take the opportunity. I get a job offer that tripled my pay. It was one of those proverbial, offers you can't refuse. But I'm sitting down in Florida by myself. My wife and my daughter are back in Ohio. I'm sitting there thinking to myself, how do you go from the coolest job in the world to selling weed in South Florida? And I thought, okay, I've got to figure this out. And I came up, to that point, I defined myself as an exercise physiologist. But I decided what my personal mission is, and my personal mission is helping individuals understand the changes necessary to alleviate suffering and contribute to the betterment of well people. That's Don Moxley. That's something I can do until I fall off the edge of the Grand Canyon, or step in front of a bus or fly a plane upside down into a barn. All good options.
At 108.
Yeah, all good exit options. So.
Don, that's fantastic. I can't think of a better way to spend the next few moments for everybody kind of, thinking about those four. Where are you at? Where are you missing some things? What do you need to add in? And then how does that fit into your purpose and your mission? Love it. Don, thank you so much. This has been fantastic.
My pleasure. I really appreciate the opportunity, Derrick. I really do. And if there's anything we can do for your listeners, have them reach out to me. I'm pretty approachable, and do whatever I can to help.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, buddy.